Anna.
And I'm Nathan. Let's go.
Around 20 years ago, my family member, my aunt, bought this piece of land. At the time, it was a gravel pit, and it continued to be a gravel pit for a couple years since. But since then, the land has been able to start to heal. We've got lots of trees growing, and we even have some St. John's wort growing.
Still all rocky to prevent erosion. And then over here, over in this area, we've got a bunch of tamarack trees, we've got some pine trees and poplar growing up and kind of reclaiming what once was this really big gravel pit. I can't remember how many acres, but it's on the larger side of what's allowed for a small commercial gravel pit.
So up on top of the gravel pit, we have a raspberry patch. We didn't realize until this past summer how big this patch is. So then we kind of came in, we've done a few days of work, and we have been rewarded with a wild amount of raspberries. The area that these raspberries have chosen to grow up in was kind of an area that they had cleared to expand the gravel pit, but never got to removing the gravel, and so it made a lovely place for all of these raspberries.
Okay, so this wigwam, Barry, my father-in-law, built at Colby College in the museum a little over a year ago, and Colby needed the wigwam gone so they could fix the roof of the terrace that it was on. So we deconstructed it, and we're reconstructing it right here. I was his birch bark apprentice this summer, so we've done a lot of like wigwam stuff, we've done a lot of basket stuff, and we decided to rebuild the wigwam here because it's right next to the stream, and Barry can have his educational classes for kids here again.
When I was a kid, my parents, my dad, Barry, Dana, used to bring groups of school children out to a different family property along the Kennebec River to do native skills and native culture learning.
All right, so this is part of our sugar bush, and it's really too large of a sugar bush to put in the video, but it's the maple syrup is the only product that you can currently buy from us and Sig's parents. We do roughly 200 taps and have something like 16 lines, so on a good year or so we have 30-ish, high 20s, 30-ish gallons of maple syrup that we make. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go to the sap house because that's at their house, but we live in the sugar bush that we take the syrup out of, or the sap out of. And you'll notice there aren't any lines up right now because we take the lines down when the spring run is done so that we can clean them with some hot water, and then when they dry, cap them so nothing grows in there, because we don't want any organisms or mold or anything like that growing in our lines. So they're down for the season. So this is our spring, and I would say it's probably hands down the #1 most useful feature to make life out here really nice and easy. It allows us to have running water in the house year-round without having to lug buckets anymore. The first year that we lived here, the spring line, which is that black hose that comes out of it, went and just fed the pond, and we'd have to go get 5-gallon pails of water from that, lug it to the house, put it in a cistern, and then pump it throughout the house like you generally would. What we have now is we have this spring line going directly into the house, and I'll show you in a little bit. We've got a 12-volt RV pump that sucks water off of that line for our domestic water inside the house. This was originally a hunting cabin that was built in, I want to say 95 or 96, and it was only meant to be, you know, seasonal, and the person that built it only came here for hunting season. And it really only been seasonal up until when we bought it. So we've had to make a lot of changes to it to make it able to be something that we can live in. We've had to make a lot of changes to the landscape to allow for the solar panels and whatnot. But right quick, while we're looking at the house, the roof used to leak before it had a tin roof on it. So there's a lot of tar paper and stuff up right now because we've had to rip out the entire south wall from rot and rebuild it basically from the ground up on this whole south side. In the process of doing so, a couple of the things that we did to help us out with heating in the winter and spring was we put a clear plastic roof on the porch instead of doing it with the brown tin like what we did with the rest of the house. We put a bunch of windows on the south side and we've plasticked it in. And with it completely enclosed to the best of our ability really quick, this spring in March, we regularly saw 90 degrees on this porch throughout the day, which aided in us heating the house with less wood. In the summertime, it's much less of a heat magnet because right there we've got a yellow birch tree, and that was very strategic in leaving that there while we were cutting trees to open it up for the solar panels, because in the summertime yellow birch has really, really long arms, right? And when they leaf out, it provides a crazy amount of shade for the tree being that far away from the house. So we haven't taken all of our plastic down from the winter time, and we're not seeing, you know, the 90-degree temperatures. We're seeing kind of more like what the average temperature is outside, because most of the day, like 85–90% of the day, the house is actually in the shade. Whereas in the winter time, when the leaves fall off of the yellow birch, we have full sun exposure basically from, you know, 8 in the morning when the sun comes up to when it goes down, heating the house for us. So on the south side of the house, you'll see a bunch of stumps where this was all wooded in between the house and the farm pond that we have. And unfortunately, we did have to remove some trees so that we could allow the sun to hit our solar panels for enough hours during the day to make our electricity year-round. It was hard to do, but that was a sacrifice we had to make. We very purposefully cut it so that on the pond side, it's wider and the wood line kind of funnels like a V where the solar panels are at the point of the V, so that in the winter time, when the sun is low in the southern sky, it's got a lot more room to move and still hit the solar panels. But in the summertime, where we have more hours in the day and we need less super direct sunlight on the solar panels, it's narrower because we wanted to keep some of those trees and have it less open. So we were very, very selective about which trees we removed to allow the sun to power our house.
Another reason that we needed to cut some trees besides just sunlight for our solar is we needed an area for our garden. And that is kind of taking up a lot of where the trees were, and eventually we'll be expanding it this way. But for now, this is what we can handle. This is our porch, and as Nathan already mentioned, it has a clear roof. We also have glass and screens to allow some air restriction in the winter and air movement in the summer. This is an amazing place to get some drying done. We don't have a dryer for clothes because this is our dryer. And then it also works for other things. So we've got some sweet grass, and I love drying herbs out here. Within a couple days, they're all dry.
This was new to us last fall. We had a little tiny Lopi stove in the corner, and that didn't really heat the house great because in the wintertime we spend a lot of hours at work, and we needed something where we could light a fire and have it last for a long time. We also really had this dream of having a wood cook stove because it's a lot more green than cooking on our propane stove that we have in the summer. So we bought this one. This is Amish made from a company called Ashland. They typically deal with mail orders. They don't have a phone. It takes a little extra time for them to make it. There is somebody who runs a website for them and communicates to them on your behalf or whatnot. But this is one of the larger models they have. They have a smaller cook stove model too, but this is the one we decided to go with because it has a larger water tank on the back. It's a modern airtight stove, but it works much like your any other cook stove would, where one side's hot and it graduates down to a lower temperature on the cooktop. We've got a decent sized oven. The firebox is absolutely enormous. It's full of tissues and whatnot right now. But we've got a summer grate, so that in the fall we can put smaller sticks and not heat up all the masonry mass in there and drive ourselves out. If you take the summer grate out, the firebox goes way down to about here, just above the ash pan. This stove is really interesting to me because let me do that and not talk over it. The draft control is really interesting because any other wood stove that I've used, it's a manual draft control. You open it up or you close it depending on what you see the temperature is. This one is not like that at all. The draft is on what's called a thermostatic spring. So there's a spring right behind this knob where once you get a fire going, you set it to an arbitrary number, and depending on how hot that spring gets, it'll open and close that damper. So when you are baking, say, if you're trying to bake at 350 degrees, you'll set this thermostatic spring to the number that you've correlated with 350 degrees. It takes a little bit of guesswork, but it'll hold it within 50 to 70 degrees of 350 degrees, and you can walk away and do whatever you need to do, and it'll hold that temperature it'll hold the oven at that temperature. It's seriously cool. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but the draft hole is in the back. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but yeah, as the wood stove heats up, depending on where you have this knob set at, once it starts to get too hot for the setting that you have it on, it automatically starts to slowly close the damper to regulate its temperature for you without electricity. This wood stove also has a 11-gallon water tank in the back. We could have opted to have a range boiler inside the firebox, but I didn't think I would be able to get a hot water tank and any of that stuff in place fast enough, and it's one of those things where if you have the range boiler, you can't use the wood stove without it hooked up or else you'll break it. So we opted for the 11-gallon water tank, and what we've done is on the output side of the water tank, we have a copper pipe and we have a valve so that we can just crack that valve and the hot water comes out and we can put it in a stainless steel pot to do dishes or bathe with or whatever in the wintertime. And instead of taking buckets and filling it in the back, we have it plumbed in to our PEX pipe and a valve in the back so that once you drain water out of it, you can just crack a valve and refill it until it's full and shut that valve off and walk away and it heats your water for you again. This spring, we found ourselves with a little bit more time on our hands. So we got started on our bees, and we also really recently got started with the chickens. We bought this coop from Wooden Wonders, who also sells the coops and the hobbit holes at the Common Ground Fair. And part of the reason we bought this is I didn't want to build one, and it's kind of a super duper security system that they've got here to keep predators out. And where we live so far in the woods, predators are a huge concern for us. Like, we've got coyotes that come really close to the house, we've got hawks, we've got owls, we've got, you know, anything you can think of that lives in Maine that's a predator, we've got it. So that prevents us from feeling comfortable letting them free range. So since they're red stars and they're okay with being in a coop, and we only have 6 of them and they're in a small coop, we feel a lot better about, you know, this size of coop with only 6 chickens so that they can stay in here, and we can bring stuff like our Japanese beetles or our cucumber beetles or whatnot into them and allow them to have some nice tasty snacks without them necessarily needing to go free range. And because I have the sneaking suspicion if we let them free range, we would suddenly have less than 6 chickens very fast. This solar panel I actually put up a couple days ago. It was a solar kit for, I think it was $50 on Amazon somewhere. And I wired it up to an old car battery. We wanted to have a light inside the coop. So it's not in the run, it's inside the coop. Because the coworker that we bought our chickens off from said that if you have something for a light in winter to extend the day hours, the amount of sunlight hours, your chickens keep laying, or the probability of them continuing to lay through the winter is higher. It's not necessarily for heat, it's just a LED light that's in there so that they can have something for light. I'm not super worried about the heat because part of buying this wonderful coop from Wooden Wonders is the inside of the coop is all insulated, and they should be nice and cozy during the winter. These are top bar hives, and we bought the hives and the bees and the classes and all that sort of stuff from Christy Hemingway. She used to go to the Common Ground Fair quite a bit, and I don't think she's been back since she moved south, but she's still an excellent resource, and she's on the Top Bar Beekeeping main page, she's still quite active as well. She's a fantastic resource, and she wants nothing but to educate folks who are interested in beekeeping. Our big draw to doing the Top Bar hives is it's more of a natural way to keep bees. They make their own comb. You're not using wax foundation that's all one size, which allows more space for mites to go into the worker brood comb and multiply easier. I just feel like it's a lot healthier and natural, a lot more healthy and natural way to keep bees. And you get a little bit less honey out of the bees when you have a top bar hive, but my biggest reason for wanting to keep bees is wanting to keep bees. It's not necessarily the honey. I just really love the idea that I have thousands and thousands of little furry pets in my yard. And as far as bang for your buck, these are cheaper than, you know, thousands of dogs. So it makes me happy. We're not gonna end up harvesting any honey this year, this fall. We're gonna wait until the springtime to try and get any honey, because then it gives them the better chance of having all the resources they need to make it through the winter, and then what we get in the springtime will truly be the leftovers. Whereas I don't feel comfortable taking a little bit of honey in the fall and then potentially making that gamble of them not having enough to get through the winter. So what we're going to do really quick is we're going to go through a hive inspection of my hive, and just to give you a little view of what's inside before I actually crack it open. Right here is what's called a follower board, and you can see that, I'm assuming, standing up a little higher than the rest of the top bars. And this follower board is like a block-off plate, but it's got a little hole in it that's like a drive-through window, and I've got a syrup feeder in here. My syrup feeder has been empty for quite a while because I don't feel like I need to feed them anymore. There's plenty of flowers out and about that are opening up for them to go forage, so I stopped feeding them, but this is still empty space right now where my feeder is. I'm going to go through bar by bar, and we'll see when we run into comb. I'm going to shout notes out to Sig, and she's going to take them down for me so I don't have to do both. These ones should be empty, so I'm going to open up 2 of them to give me some space to work. I don't think they're making comb on these ones yet. Anyway. So this is a top bar, right? It's flat on the top, it's beveled on the bottom, so it kind of comes to a point, and it's basically just a wide stick that you set across the cavity of the hive. So there's a bunch of bees that are crawling in between my follower board and my top bar, and I'm trying to get the top bar to make contact so that they can't get in and out. So you just kind of do a little dance and ask really nicely, and they respond to a little bit of pressure, but I'm not like jamming it to squish them. So I'm giving them a little bit of pressure and, you know, asking them nicely, hey bees, please move a little bit, so I can close that up. This is actually really, really cute, because if you want to get a little closer, when I move a bar, you can see a huge chain of bees that are holding on for dear life in between the bars, because they don't want to fall to the bottom, but they'll figure that out. We're probably not going to see much for a bit.
So what are they doing over there if they're
over
not,
there?
Yeah, all those ones that are hanging on to the empty ones.
I'm not entirely sure. I'll defer all questions I don't know the answer to Christy, because she is the ultimate expert. And I'm starting to run into some propolis on 17, so I have a feeling we're probably going to start seeing some comb soon. So the propolis is like resin, tree resin glue that they seal up all the cracks with. So this hive tool, I can't just move these top bars. This hive tool I have to actually use as a pry bar to kind of pop open that glue a little bit, because they don't like air drafts and cracks and all that sort of stuff, so they seal up all those cracks with propolis. As the season goes on and it starts to get cold in the fall, that propolis won't be as warm and sticky as what it is right now, and that's when we have to stop going into the hives, because once that propolis starts getting brittle and starts cracking, they can't fix it as easy after you break it apart. So we have to, once we get to that point, we have to leave our bees alone and hope that they're all happy for the winter. 15, I'm gonna go ahead and pull out and see if they've built anything on. So on 15, whoops, let me get some of you guys off of there so we can see better. On 15, they've started making some more comb. Yep, and I don't really, the light isn't great for me trying to see stuff. It's a little bit off center. I'm gonna have to make a bit of a correction. But, what do I see? I see them starting to put, I think, a little bit of honey in that. I'm gonna bend this back very carefully because it needs to be plumb. If they start going cross comb, which is building comb across like this, that starts to seize up all the bars, and then it's not a removable comb hive anymore, which is illegal. And if they start building it off plumb, which is going this way, then it also runs the potential of going cross comb. So as they're building new comb, we have some various tricks that we need to employ to make sure it's plumb and going straight with the top bar. The biggest trick is making sure your hive is plumb, so that they use gravity and build straight down, but that doesn't always work. As you can see by this, they're starting to go a little off kilter. And what I've found too is blowing on them makes them want to move. So if you're trying to look at a specific spot on the comb and there's too many bees there, if you give a nice gentle, they move out of the way. So what bar was that, Sig?
That was 15.
15. Okay, so 14.
So the purpose of what you're doing is to just correct whatever it is
It's
there.
to correct it, it's to check the bees to see how they're doing, to see if they're healthy. Sig's taking my notes, so we write down on each and every comb what we see in the comb. Do we see eggs? Do we see larvae, worker brood, drone brood, honey, etc.? Just to keep a track of what this hive is doing throughout the season, and to see what the bees are up to. Make sure they're healthy and happy and doing their thing.
Boy, they certainly look good. Whoa.
So right here, we have an almost full bar of comb. And let me flip it over just so I can see the other side. We do have some worker brood, so let me blow on that to try and get you a view of what that's going to look like. So that's some capped worker brood right there. So that's going to be baby worker bees here in a little bit. Some of our videos online on our TikTok account, the Dana Homestead, we have some video footage of bees breaking the capping, some worker bees breaking the capping and hatching. So like newborn baby bees. And it is one of the cutest things ever. All right, excuse me ladies, I gotta close you up. So with top bars, the comb is only attached to the stick on the top, to the top bar. So unlike Langstroth hives where they have a frame all the way around it, you can pick it up and move it around and look at it and it's totally fine. If I was to pick up this top bar and then turn it on its side, gravity would rip it off the top bar. So to be able to check both sides, there's a very specific way you do it. You pull it out and look at one side. Okay, I see some drone brood, you know, mostly open. And then to check the other side, keeping the comb in line with the bar, you'll flip it upside down like that. And being very careful to not hold it sideways, you'll look at the other side and say, okay, I've got kind of the same thing on this side, except it's a little bit more even, right? And then you just swing it back down and put it back in place. Another cool thing about Christie's hives is, once I put this roof on, anyway, I'll show you, she has a window in the side. So you can't rely on it to do an inspection with, but I can take this shutter off and you can look at the inside of the hive with all the bees.
Oh, cool.
And we can look at that as well without our bee suits.
Yeah.
So on days where we haven't aggravated them by ripping apart their hive, if we just want a quick check, we can peek in there. And we don't have to get suited up for it. Another thing we want to mention about the bees is Christy, the person that Nathan kept mentioning that we learned everything from, has a couple of books. The first book she has is called The Thinking Beekeeper. And the second one, I believe, is called Advanced Top Bar Beekeeping or something like that. She also offers an online video course, which we found very helpful, and normal years she has a weekend in-person class, though she lives down in North Carolina, I think. This year, because of the pandemic, she did offer it online, and so we were able to attend it, and we just learned so much, and being able to ask her questions and get that instant feedback help us so much. So we got compost, and our compost is pretty much just our leftover vegetables and non-animal product dairy, or not dairy, food scraps. In this bin right here, it's a lot darker, and the reason why it's darker is because a lot of this actually is muck from the bottom of our pond. The pond decomposes really slowly, so it's super mucky, but that's a benefit for us, and so we have been composting it along with a lot of the aquatic vegetation that we've been pulling out and putting right in here, and it makes some awesome compost. Alright, so this is our garden. It is in a much better place than it was last year. We've got some herbs, we've got onions, peas, beans, lots of stuff. Now, when we first moved in here, this area was covered, or was taken up by trees, and like we said earlier, we did have to cut those trees down to make space for the garden as well as the solar panels. So, being an area that was covered in trees, the soil wasn't that great. So it has been taking a long process to build up the soil. We were fortunate that a previous owner left a large pile of topsoil that we moved over here. And we've also been adding muck from the pond, vegetation from the pond, and we've also been adding leaves to the garden to help build up that vegetation. You'll see there's some wood chips. We've been helping with that. In some of the rows, you'll see there is dead grass trimmings. This is doing a couple things. One, it's helping to build up organic matter in our soil, and it also kills or prevents weeds from growing that we don't want. Some people don't like that because they think putting grass in your garden is going to make grass grow. However, with the beating sun down and it being all chopped up from being mowed, it actually dries out really fast and comes very crunchy and breaks down really fast.
And a really important thing to add to that is when you cut the grass, you have to cut it before it goes to seed.
Yes.
So if you cut all the grass before it goes to seed, you can throw it directly in big heaps in your aisleways, and it compacts. What we're doing essentially is creating a really thick, dense mat on our walkways that won't let vegetation grow, and then through the fall, winter, spring, it'll eventually break down and get turned into soil long after we've used it as a covering mat. So the way that the spring works is the spring line comes all the way down the hill, it's buried across the driveway, and it pops up right here. And I've got, to try and avoid condensation and rot, I've got a big hole going through my floor. I've got a piece of 1.5 inch PVC pipe, and between the PVC pipe and the floor I have spray foam. And then I've got the black well line in the going through that PVC pipe, and another layer of spray foam in between there in an effort to try and stop the sweating and rot of the floor. What I've found is it still sweats and it still makes my floor moist, so I just shut the spring off in the summer when it's going to sweat and let it run during the winter so it doesn't freeze, and it's not going to sweat in the winter anyway. So right here, this is the inlet. So this is a spring coming in. It just pops through the floor and then loops down around and goes back out to the other, like the yard hydrant and whatnot, or drains into the pond when it's running. Right here we have a T that goes to a valve, and we have a 12 volt C-flow or SureFlow RV water pump. It's a diaphragm pump. It's capable of doing something like 5 gallons a minute, and it runs off of the 12 volt batteries so that we don't have to run it through the inverter and waste any electricity. So that sucks off from the T of the spring line, and ends up going into a pressure tank so that the pump cycles a lot less, and then goes into the PEX pipe to go to our kitchen sink or go to our tub upstairs or any of that sort of stuff. So we're able to get away with not lugging buckets of water to a cistern anymore, and we have what ultimately feels like, running water in any other house, because we're able to have something, fortunately, like the spring. When we first started out, we had something like a 30-gallon high-density polyethylene HDPE tub, not like a 55-gallon drum, but it's smaller. And we'd lug 5-gallon pails of water to dump into that cistern, and then we'd pump it with this pump throughout the house, doing stuff like laundry or bathing or any of those sort of uses for water. Made it so we had to lug water a lot. This has been such a lifesaver, and with it running in the winter, freezing isn't an issue. So I am just so thankful that this property has a spring that we can utilize, so that we don't have to lug water like a lot of our other off-grid friends that have to lug water. It's a real chore.
Cool thing about having this spout out here so close to our garden is we can water with it. We just tighten on our hose, turn it on, and we get some water. I just heard my washing machine kicked on, which is why we're not having the psh that you normally get when watering your garden, but hey, we have water for right now. Now, a reason why this works is because right here we have a valve, and right now it's shut off because it's summertime and we don't necessarily need the water flowing like in the wintertime. We have to, or else our water will freeze. But when we want to use this hose, we have to make sure the valve is off so that the water can then travel up and out.
Now we're going to go into our solar electric setup just a little bit. Behind me are our 4 solar panels. All of them are 24-volt nominal solar panels. They actually operate at around 30, a little bit more than 30 volts. The way that I have them wired is the bottom one, which is a newer panel, is wired in a series with one of the side ones, and then the other side one is wired in a series with the top. So we have 2 series of 2 wired up like that. They run at about 80 volts inside, depending on the day, and our multi-point power tracking charge controller that we'll show you in just a little bit. These panels are rated at about 1200 watts. We've actually seen a little bit more than 1200 watts, but typically the most we see is around 1000 or 1100 at a time. This solar panel rack is actually homemade, and it's an engineering project that my dad and I worked on. You can see that we used angle iron and some electrical conduit to brace off from the center hub. And actually the way that this post works is there's a post that's in the ground that we put concrete around, and then this post is schedule 80 pipe that fits over that post with some plastic bushings inside. So this bolt right here, I could pull this bolt out and actually spin and angle the solar panels in a different direction. And the reason that I might want to do that is in the winter, we get a lot more western sunlight than we do eastern sunlight with this, the way that we cut the trees. So in the winter, if I felt like I needed the extra electricity, I could pull this bolt out, spin the panels, cheat them a little bit west at night, or in the evening, and put the pin back in and maybe get a couple of extra hours of sunlight. We haven't really felt like we've had to do that since we put it in, but it's nice to have that as an option if we feel like we need it. Up here, we've got the hub that controls the angle to the sun that we adjust during the different seasons, because in the winter time the sun is lower, in the summertime the sun is higher. I'll do a close-up of this in just a minute, but basically the idea behind it is we loosen this nut right here that pinches it all in place, and then there's some threaded rod on this back side where I can actually by hand just spin it to adjust the angle of the sun. And I'll show you that really close up right now. So right here, we've got the pivot point. Over here, this stays still. This is threaded, and then this is held in place by 2 nuts. So like I showed you, I can spin this, and that adjusts my solar panel angle either way. So we were just outside at the solar panels, and now we're inside at something called the combiner box. Now something that National Electric Code says is you've got to have a combiner box, which is essentially a breaker panel, before your electricity goes inside of your house. Now, I learned how to do all of this stuff, and I got most of my materials from a company called the Alt-E Store, short for the Alternative Energy Store. They have a website, and they're located in Massachusetts, right off of I-95, I believe. So for DIY folks like me who want to go get the solar panels and some of the other big items, we can actually save quite a bit of money in just truck freight shipping by driving down, loading everything up, and driving back to wherever you're from. It's really nice for the Northeast. They have a lot of resources as well to teach you how to do this stuff, how to, figure out how much solar you need, how to properly ground it, how to properly run it, all of that sort of stuff. They have manuals and videos and everything that a DIY solar person would ever really need in order to be able to do this sort of stuff on their own. Between the solar panels outside and here, we've got direct bury 10 gauge wire running, and we've got our 2 series running in parallel. So this is 2 of our solar panels on a breaker, and then the other 2 solar panels on a breaker. Combines both of those series and then runs it inside from here. Okay, so now we're inside of our electrical closet inside. So what you can see is we've got 3 12-volt batteries because our system is 12 volt. Each of these massive 12-volt batteries are 200 amp hours a piece. So we have 600 amp hours at 12 volts. And what that roughly equates to is, since we use about a kilowatt of electricity a day, we can get around 3 days without sun before the batteries discharge below the 50% and can possibly do long-term damage. So right here, we've got our electrical panel. The combiner box that I just showed you outside comes into some breakers on this side because you need to have a breaker between every single component in your electrical system. We've got some big breakers. We've got my DC loads, and some of the DC loads we have in the house is some of our lights are DC, because if our inverter was to go bad, we still want something for light on each floor. Our refrigerator is 12 volts. Our water pump is 12 volts, and I also have a miscellaneous circuit that isn't wired up to anything yet, but it's nice to have that if I ever come across another DC load that I need to wire in. Right here is our charge controller, and it's a Midnight Classic. It's a 150 volt, 90 amp model, because that's what I feel like works best for our 12 volt system. I highly recommend Midnight. They've been really good to me. They've been really good to some of our other off-grid friends. And another super plus for a Midnight is when I show you a still of the breaker panel, I'll point out some of the components in there, but one of the components in there is a shunt, and on that shunt, something called a Whiz-Bang Junior. So what a shunt does is it has a known amount of resistance between 2 poles, and the Whiz-Bang Junior has a sensor on each side of that. So what the Whiz-Bang Junior is essentially able to do is take into consideration the ambient temperature, the temperature of the batteries, and count how many amps that go into and leave the batteries. So it essentially keeps track of the power that we're putting into the batteries, the power that we're discharging the batteries, and is able to give us a relatively accurate number for how much, what the percent state of charge is. Now, if we didn't have something like a Whiz-Bang Junior telling us, our batteries are at 95%, the way that you have to, or the process you have to go through to tell that is a lot of math, a lot of, sometimes if you have vented batteries, you have to test the electrolyte inside of it. It's just a big headache, where this system is able to do that automatically for us based on some set parameters we have, give us a really quite accurate ballpark for the percent state of charge that our batteries are. And it's as easy as pushing a button and looking at what it tells us. From there, we've got our inverter. This is a Xantrex Freedom HFS 2000 watt inverter. It's capable of doing a 4000 watt peak. It's really a beast of an inverter, and it's able to do just about anything we'd need it to do. It's also a charger. So right here, I've got an extension cord. I haven't swapped that out for Romex yet because there's still a lot of work that needs to go in here, and this stuff is going to move around. But we're able to plug this inverter in via this extension cord directly into a generator, and that generator will be able to charge our batteries with 60 amps, I believe. So something like 800 watts ballpark. Whenever the generator is running and plugged in, it can charge our batteries, and it can also run all the AC loads in our house so that it's not draining the batteries while trying to recharge them. It's a really excellent setup because it makes, supplementary charging really easy, as, plugging it into an outlet if we need to use that. And then from this inverter, it goes to a regular AC breaker panel, much like what you'd have in your house. It's a small one because there's only 2 circuits in the house, but after that, it's pretty much just like how your house would be wired up on the grid. Part of living off the grid and having a very small electrical setup is you have to be careful of what loads you're running at the same time. For example, we can't run our coffee maker, which is just a regular old Mr. Coffee maker, and our washer at the same time without overloading our system. So what this is right here is this is the control panel for our inverter. Just like the control panel I was poking earlier is for the charge controller, this is just the control panel for our inverter. And if we were to try something like running our laundry machine or our coffee maker at the same time, what would happen is it would flash an error code right here. It would beep at us and it would shut the AC power off to our house. We'd have to go in and restart the inverter and a couple of other things to be able to use AC power again. It's really not a big deal. It's just one of those things where it's annoying and you learn the limits of the system that you've designed and put in place, and we just don't do laundry in the morning when we have our coffee. If that doesn't shut down, another way to overload your system is you could be drawing too many amps from the battery or something else like that, and it's just like popping a breaker in your house. We have breakers, we don't have fuses. If you have fuses, you'd have to replace the fuse, but for us, if we pop a breaker, which I don't really think we ever really have,
Maybe once or twice.
Maybe once or twice, you just go and flick the breaker back on like you would in your house. This is our refrigerator. Unfortunately, we don't have a freezer yet, but I really want ice cream, so that might be in the future. This is a Sundancer 12-volt refrigerator, and they are one of the more pricey singular items that we have for appliances. I just couldn't find another way that I was happy with the amount of electricity used to be able to refrigerate our food. This only uses something like 0.15 or 0.2 of a kilowatt a day. Like 200 watt hours a day for refrigeration is absolutely nothing, because it's a chest freezer. It works on 12 volts or 24 volts. So if we ever, put in an addition and then end up changing out our 12 volt bank and inverter for a 24 volt bank and inverter, this will still work for us. Part of the reason it uses such a small amount of electricity is because it's super insulated. It looks large on the outside, but the inside is only about 1.5 cubic feet of refrigeration. You can basically see the bottom right now, and it's this really small area. I mean, you can fit maybe a couple of jars high. Which is plenty for us. I know for some folks that's just not nearly enough, but we can very easily run it on our system.
And another way that this makes sense for us in terms of efficiency is that it is a chest fridge. Rather than with the door fridges, you bring it open, and how convection, heat rising, cold sinks works, your cold air comes rushing out. But with this, if you leave it open, go do something on the stove, come back, all that cold air stays sunken right here. Though we still don't like to do that.
Okay, so this is our clothes washer. We don't have a dryer because our whole idea behind going off the grid was, being eco-friendly, and I just can't bring myself to have a propane dryer. We don't make enough electricity to have an electric dryer, so we just hang dry our clothes. This is a Panda washer. We got it at Home Depot, I think. I think it's something like 1.5 cubic feet of laundry capabilities. And it uses, per amount of laundry, it uses about the same amount of electricity as a larger washer does. But the spikes in the electrical usage are much lower. Like, I think the most that this uses is something like 800 watts. We've tried to run a full-size washer here, and we just couldn't do it because the spikes were too high to get that motor turning. We could run it if it was already started, but we didn't have enough juice to start it, whereas this is absolutely no problem. And yes, it's small. We do more than one load of laundry per week, but for us, the idea that we can, do our laundry off the sun and not have to pay for the electricity and all that sort of stuff, makes the smaller washer much more feasible for us. Internet is another big issue for people who live way out there, particularly in the woods. For us, our nearest power lines or internet lines are more than a half a mile away. So we've kind of dabbled with some solutions for how we can get internet out here. We had satellite internet for a little bit, and I didn't really like seeing the big satellite dish in the yard. Anytime there was anything for a cloud, it just wouldn't work. There was a 20 gig cap, and it was quite expensive. So we really didn't think that the satellite internet was a great solution for us. So what we've done is there's a little tiny bit of cell phone signal out here without the booster. And I decided to do some tests and see if it was viable. And ultimately we decided to go with a cell phone signal booster, which is the little white antenna that you see in the tree. That was about $500, I think, which is the same base cost as the satellite dish. And that boosts our signal, so we have 3 bars of signal on our phones, and we have plenty of internet to watch things like Netflix or play around on the internet as much as we really want. And with the unlimited data on our phones, that was about the same price increase on our cell phone plan as what we paid for the satellite internet. So we have unlimited, relatively high-speed internet here for the same price, other than just the initial investment of the cell phone signal booster. So those won't work everywhere, but if you have something for a signal, even if it's like half a bar, the cell phone signal booster should work pretty good for you. And on our solar electric setup, it uses something like 8 to 12 watts when it's plugged in, so it's a nominal electricity use to allow us to have our internet here.
How do you find out if it's going to work before you invest the $500?
You either call somebody to have them come out, or I can't remember what the number is but for my cell phone, it's an iPhone, and if you dial a certain number, which I'm sure you can find on the internet, it brings up this menu where you can actually see more than just looking at the bars that you have. It gives you an actual decibel reading for your signal strength from the nearest cell phone tower. So it's kind of technical, but again, you can look it up on the internet, and they describe step by step what number to put in, what thing to click on your smartphone. And then once I figured that out, I walked around the yard to see what would be the best spot. And right here was a relatively decent signal at this maple tree. However, what I will say is now that the leaves are out, I'm going to do it again, and that might potentially move, because the funny thing happens when leaves come out, they block your direct line to the cell phone tower, and I might have a better place for that antenna in the summertime. So I'll need to revisit it. It still works great compared to the satellite, but it works less good than it did before the leaves came out.
So like we said before, my aunt bought this property around early 2000s, and for the most part it was in her name. My parents used the land for their sugar bush, and then maybe like 3.5-4 years ago, my parents decided to buy it from my aunt. And when they did that, I don't know if it was their suggestion or our suggestion, but we kind of came up with an agreement that we would carve out, Nathan and I, would carve out 2 acres around the hunting cabin and buy that from my parents. So we were very, very fortunate that my parents were kind of our bank. So we didn't have to go to a bank, because before, when we were living in an apartment, we tried applying for loans so we could buy a house or buy some land, and we got turned down. That was just not an option for us. The banks looked at us and said, nope, we're not lending you money. So it's only because really of our parents, or my parents, being generous that we were able to buy this land. And I mean, we're still paying it because we pay our mortgage every week. But the amount that we're paying, every month, not week.
When we lived in an apartment, it was something like $730 a month just for rent, and we had like utilities and that sort of stuff, which that's a lot of money. just every single month for, you know, where you're living, just basic apartment, whatever. And you don't really get anything for it other than a place to live at the time, you know, closer to home ownership or anything like that. And since Barry and Lori, Sig's parents, were gracious enough to allow us to buy the 2 acres and the hunting cabin off of them, we have kind of really been able to start putting away money, because it's been so much cheaper to live off the grid here than what it was with our apartment. For instance, when we bought the house, we figured out, they personally financed us because we bought it off of them. We figured out what our monthly payments would be. We bought the house for $22,000 or $26,000, I think. And 26, yeah. And that, and we bought a new car at the same time. Both of those payments combined were cheaper than what we were spending on our apartment. And we bought the new car so we could go back and forth to our jobs as teachers and whatnot. So for us, because we were able to kind of forego getting approved by a bank, and we did do a down payment, but we didn't have to do the standard, you know, massive down payment that a lot of folks have to save up a whole lot of money for. We were able to actually start saving money by buying a place. And there was no running water, there was no electricity, none of that stuff when we bought it. There was a lot of rot, that sort of stuff. So putting in the solar electric, all included, where I kind of designed the system and installed it myself, was somewhere around $4,000. Which, since we were working at the time and our bills were significantly reduced, we were able to finance that relatively easily. While we bought it and got the solar stuff purchased before we actually moved in. And then once we moved in and we were no longer renting from an apartment, we were able to start, you know, saving a little bit more money towards ripping out the walls and replacing the rot and that sort of stuff. So we've been putting a lot of money into it, but as far as just getting, you know, the basics of running water and electricity, and once we got the house secured itself, it's been significantly cheaper than, you know, a cheap college apartment that a lot of folks end up doing when they're going to school.
Right.
So you were lucky enough to have parents who were able to finance you. Nonetheless, you're paying a regular mortgage, which gives them an income. This is exactly how I've done it with my kids. If you don't happen to have a parent that's in that position, explain some other alternatives.
You can find a house that's kind of fallen in. Maybe before the bank takes it over, find the owner and say, look, before you lose this, why don't we strike a deal? You could always try and find somebody who would be willing to finance you. I have a feeling that as more and more folks our age are trying to go towards owning a house, the traditional ways of going about owning a house aren't really going to work for a lot of people in our age bracket, and we're going to have to get creative, kind of like what we did. I'm sure there's somebody out there who would be willing to finance you, because if their money is sitting in a bank account, they're not making a whole lot of money off of that. Where if they personally finance you to purchase a, you know, a really beat up house that you're willing to put a lot of sweat equity into, they can make more money off of that proposition and you paying them to personally finance that house than they would ever make off from, you know, their money just sitting in a savings account. Something too that I keep thinking of and I want to add before I forget about it is buying a house that's fallen in, or trying to, you know, put together something for off-grid solar, or trying to, you know, make a paradigm shift to living this way is a scary thing. And I'll be quite frank, there was quite a few times that I was scared at the mess that I got into. And it's okay to be scared. You just gotta, you know, do the best you can now, make do with what you've got, and always strive for making it better. It's okay to be scared, but do it scared. Don't let that prevent you from, you know, trying to live your dreams of being as self-reliant as possible, or being as green as possible, not being connected to the electrical grid, trying to cut out fossil fuels, all that sort of stuff. It's okay to be scared to make that paradigm shift, but do it anyway. Find a way to make it work. It's been an incredible amount of work. We don't take a day off, you know. When we work at the school, we're at the school for, you know, 12 to 15 hours a day throughout the winter. During the week, on the weekends, we work on the house, we work on the yard, we work on the garden. During the summertime, we don't take the summertime off. We work on the house, we work on the garden, we work on the yard. This year was a little different because I don't want to go out to, you know, super populated areas to get a whole bunch of materials. So I've kind of taken a little bit of a breather on a lot of the house projects, but that's very much a rarity. And I would dare say that the situation that we're in right now is not typical. I mean, we haven't had one of these pandemic things in like a century, right?
Something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Last thing that we want to talk about is why live like this. Now, for me, I have wanted to live like this since I was a sophomore in high school, and probably even sooner than that. But that was the moment where I realized I want to live in the woods, and I don't want to be grid tied. I just, you know, I want to sustain myself, and my entire life has been working towards that process. I want to be good to my environment for big reasons like climate change, and also just being respectful and responsible to the land that I am existing on. I love getting to spend time in the garden and in the woods. It makes me happy and it makes me feel good. And I want other people to be able to learn from us and live this type of lifestyle.
So it's one of those things too where if you're watching this video and you take an interest in it, by all means find some way to get in contact with us on Instagram or TikTok or however else. And I want to be a resource. You know, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, we'll figure out a way to, you know, teach you what we know, whether that's bringing you here and showing you what we've done in a more in-depth way, or giving you other resources. It's such an amazing pet project to, you know, make something like this out of absolutely nothing that it would be, I feel, really irresponsible to not share it with everybody.